Hi Itka, hi everyone.
Hello.
Hello. It seems that our new Zoom system is working. Finally.
Great.
Yeah, I'm happy to see that as well. I have the materials available, so let me see how you can share it. Yes, I think I can do it here. Share. Yes, open. Just let us wait a moment. I think people are connecting. Yeah. I think I need to reopen Zoom, so please wait a second. Okay. Shall we begin? Or wait a few more minutes? Yitka, can you hear me? Okay. Shall we begin? Or are we still waiting? What do you think?
I don't know, we can slowly start.
Yeah.
Maybe let's a little bit check in who's here, so we know where, chemistry, what area.
I assume the links are available. So let's start, and if someone wants to join, let him join.
They can join anytime.
Yeah, this time we have not discussed in advance what we are going to say, so it's going to be improvised. But I assume you have looked at my notes. I haven't seen yours. Okay. So, I have prepared according to our initial program, initial plan, a basic structure that I think we are going to follow, and I hope you are going to comment on the chemical aspect in detail and share your experience and insight as a chemist. Because the material that we are discussing today is strictly chemical, with some, of course, philosophical insights and ideas, but this is very structural. This is very low-level material. And I think the most interesting way to discuss this entire material of the 60s, of Shulgin's first decade of his research, is to do it chronologically. Yeah, and my idea is to look at three, let's say, layers simultaneously. What I mean by this is to listen to fragments of the Varieties of Psychedelic Experience of his 1987 lecture, where he, so to speak, summarizes the entire material of the Nature of Drugs lectures, given in the same year, and both are kind of recollective summaries, where he has a synoptic total glance at his previous achievements, in particular the first decade, the most important one, without any doubt. And so I suggest that we listen to fragments, a few, 2, 3, at most 4 fragments, 2 minutes long, from the video, and then organize the entire material according to this talk by Sasha Shulgin. And then I would like to reconstruct this narrative in detail, basing on the Nature of Drugs lectures, namely lectures 17 and 18, the ones on mescaline and the basic psychedelics that he developed on the basis of mescaline. And I would do this in conjunction with his notes from the lab books, to the extent that we can quote some interesting fragments, and they are very useful because we can date. They pinpoint exactly when he did what. Yes, so we can do a chronological ordering, and this is what I did in the handout, which we can give away to all the participants, and I will just post the link on the chat. So here it is. And finally, there are the scientific papers published by him, where he more or less in the same chronological order discusses all the compounds that he synthesized and examined. So I think this is the obvious way of addressing it in a chronological and at the same time systematic order, because I think those two progressions, those two orders overlap. Yeah, the systematic and the chronological. We start with mescaline and then see what we can do and see what stems out of this basic structure, and this is what he did in this decade. What do you think?
Yes, precisely, and hopefully we can discuss some just interesting storylines and notes that branch out of these compounds. And I think there's other chemists in this call right now, so it would be interesting to have more interactive and just talk about different things that tie to the molecules themselves.
Yeah. We are all here to do it. We encourage you, all of you present here, to participate in whatever way you wish, by commenting on what we say, by asking questions and so on. So I assume that the materials are visible, and I would like just to start with this simple image that you can see, hopefully, which is an illustration from Richard Schultes, from one of his popular books, where we see the plants containing various psychedelic substances, and they are distributed among the globe, and this is more or less the state of knowledge at the time Shulgin was starting his research. And the interesting thing is that he focused on one particular plant, namely a peyote plant containing mescaline. Well, first of all, because of his 1960 experience, but also because of the simplicity of the structure. As he states in many places, LSD, which was also available at the time, was too complex a compound to grasp its structure, activity relationship completely, yes? And only because mescaline was so simple structurally, it was most proper of all the psychedelic compounds known at the time to start a detailed structural analysis with, right? So I think this is the reason. Not only the coincidence, the historical coincidence, but also the structural fact of the simplicity of the structure, right?
And at that time, when Sasha discovered it, there already was the amphetamine analog.
Yes.
known.
Yes.
MA. So it was an obvious place to begin.
Yeah, exactly. So there were already available not only the knowledge about mescaline synthesized by Levin and Hefter and so on, and other German chemists at the end of the 19th century, and we knew all those major alkaloids of peyote, but also we knew that one of them was active in particular. We knew its structure. Yes, it was all examined at the end of the 19th century in Germany, and just before Shulgin's research, there was some activity among the chemists. Yeah, Smithies, Hay. There are some names that we can quote. The predecessors of Shulgin, who did experiments not only with mescaline but also with TMA that he later examined in detail. So I think we are going to get into this in detail, perhaps after hearing his own statement. Yeah, so I suggest that we listen for a while to the first fragment that I have selected from the Varieties of Psychedelic Experience, and this fragment would be I will just play it right now. It's the 6th minute from video 3, available in the internet.
I mentioned 5 from Levine. I'll make the classifications just about as plentiful as there are compounds to look at.
Excuse me, I will just share the window. It's 6:20. Yes, there I am. And here he talks about the beginning of his research with phenethylamines and with mescaline, and it will be like about 2 minutes. So let me share it. And can you see the video right now?
Yes. It's the phenethylamines. Let me talk about the phenethylamines a little bit. The phenethylamines, the prototype of phenethylamines is mescaline. It's the alkaloid that is found in the peyote cactus, the little dumpling cactus that used to grow wild in Chihuahua and southern Mexico, or southern Texas, until they found that they could pull it up by the root and eat the root too, and it's being rapidly stripped from the fields. I'm sad to say. It's being very, very rapidly cleared out of its native habitat. But it did, and it still can be found in Chihuahua and in Texas. The dumpling mushroom grows in nature to about 2 inches in diameter. Dumpling cactus grows to about 2 inches in diameter. It is without spines. It has little tufts. It's named Lophophora from the tufts it carries. And its main active component is mescaline, a very simple phenethylamine. And you'll still find in the major textbooks the only active phenethylamine in this entire area. Because phenethylamines are known to be destroyed in the body. They are subjects to an enzyme system that destroys amines. One of our big protecting agents is an enzyme system called monoamine oxidase. It's an enzyme that gets rid of amines such as mescaline. It happens not to touch mescaline for reasons that are not totally clear. So mescaline survives, but it takes hundreds of milligrams of mescaline to get an effective experience. Typical dosage, 300, 400, 500 milligrams of the actual cactus, maybe 6 or 8 or 10 of the cacti is necessary to get a full psychedelic experience. And since this is the only phenethylamine that was known to be active, and since phenethylamines are known to be rapidly destroyed, the statement is made that there are no active phenethylamines other than mescaline. Well, I can say that's not exactly so. I know of perhaps 150 that are active, and they are, interestingly enough, many of them much more potent. They're interestingly enough not particularly attacked by monoamine oxidase. It's almost as if that enzyme system had its own territory to work on, and it largely works on stimulants, and does not particularly work on psychedelics. I don't know why, but it just happens to draw these little lines in its own metabolic decision on what to be effective.
Okay. So this fragment is what I wanted to share with you. Any comments on this, Jitka, or anyone? I think it's... have you heard it well? Was it fine? The quality, yeah? All right, so I think this is a good point of departure for our discussion, since here Shulgin says how he started with and how he ended up with, what he ended up with, namely, he started with the knowledge that there is one active phenethylamine, and then he arrived up to 150. Yeah, not even touched by the monoamine oxidase enzymatic system. Yes, so they are of course described in PIHKAL, but at the time of the lecture, PIHKAL was not yet written, and it was more or less 30 years of his experiments with various derivatives of mescaline. So he started with one and then went systematically on with all various substitutions of the phenethylamine ring, and went in various directions and explored, developed a system of names that still holds, right? So the first 10 years were, I think, the biggest breakthrough and the biggest achievement of his research. Would you agree? I can't hear you, Itka.
Yes, I was opening the window.
All right.
I mean, there's been so many achievements, it's hard to say that it's one of the most, which is the most important one, but
yes, so he arrived at 150 various phenethylamines, and I would suggest discussing them one by one, all those major important families that he discussed. Start first, if we look at the materials that I have prepared. So let's just look briefly at them step by step, one by one, and then we can go into details. So first we have, of course, mescaline that was examined well before his own research started, and there are several publications by chemists that preceded him, and he describes it in detail in the 17th chapter of The Nature of Drugs, and I would like to focus on this in a moment. Yes, if you let me. But first, let's just have a general glance. So maybe we could together look at the various depictions of the structure of mescaline taken from Hefter and other chemists. Then we can see Sasha's own depiction of the structure. And in the lectures, The Nature of Drugs, he presents it together with other peyote alkaloids, noting that this is the most important one. Yes, the one that is psychedelically active. And maybe you could comment on the chemical aspect. And here I would suggest having a look at the detailed report that he gives of his initial idea of looking at the basic structure of mescaline and looking at the possibilities of its development, of its modification in various ways. And then if he had this initial idea, he had to develop a way to do it systematically and consequently. Yes, so he describes this effort, this attempt, this master plan that he had in detail in this lecture, and we'll return to this in a moment. And he started with the family of TMA, which was already examined, yes, before he started his research. So there were some predecessors before him, but he was the first one to do this total examination of TMA, right? And after TMA, which he did in the 60s already, just after doing experiments with mescaline, according to the lab book, it was all in 1960. He started with TMA also in 1960, and then proceeded with other compounds from the series. And he described them in 65 in one of the papers, all those 6 trimethoxyamphetamines, right? At some point he says, well, he shouldn't have used the name amphetamine, right? He was so to speak sorry to have used it because of the associations that he did not foresee that would be negative and judgmental, because of this unfortunate letter A at the end of the code name for all those compounds. He could not have foreseen how it would be associated. For him, it was just a neutral chemical name. So then I would suggest looking at the general structure of phenethylamines and looking at the idea of developing them from the basic structure of mescaline. I think we can do it in a moment. And look at the particular aspects, qualities, characteristics of TMA and how he did this ring substitution and how he did, I would say, there are, in maths, we say that there are a number of possible permutations or combinations, right? So in fact, there is a factorial, right? 3 times 2 times 1, in case of all those possibilities, gives us six combinations altogether. And it can be easily calculated, right? So if we have 6 positions, we can have a finite, easily calculable number of isomers, right? And they all had to be examined. Some of them were more difficult to obtain, as you can probably know better than me, Jitka. And I would perhaps suggest discussing this in detail. I have prepared some quotations from the Nature of Drugs to look into in detail. So I think TMA2 is the most interesting for various reasons, and we can discuss this in a moment. And then he did, just to give a general glance, general outlook, experience with other compounds. In 1961 he did alpha-ethyl mescaline, and then he examined various other ethyl homologues, and we can discuss it in a moment. It was a total examination of everything he could synthesize. And then the next step, which is I think crucial, and we'll have a short audio fragment on it, was experiment, because he went to a dead end, so to speak. Yes, and then his idea, he admits, he confesses that there was a kind of dead end, and then he returned to natural compounds, to essential oils, from nutmeg, and he had some hints that this is going to be a fruitful area to research, to investigate. And so he went into nutmeg and into myristicin, saffrol, and other essential oils, and described in a few publications, did some experiments, and this was crucial. Because this led him first to the synthesis of those oils, and then he had this idea given to him by a certain Barfknecht, yes, Charles Barfknecht, who, as far as I know, is still alive, and perhaps we could ask him for his testimony. Barfknecht, as Shulgin says in the 67 paper in the footnote 9, gave him the idea that you can do a certain conversion by adding ammonia to those structures, and by means of this ammonia addition, you convert those structures to compounds very well known to us, namely to MMDA, to MDA, and so on. You can obtain them from myristicin, saffrol, elemicin, and so on. So this was inspiring, and ultimately this led to the creation of also of MDMA after all, but not yet, not in the 60s, right? So then, after this breakthrough discoveries and examination of essential oils, he goes into MDA and MDMA. So various methylenedioxyamphetamines, which is a whole new area of research, and we could discuss this. There are many pages in the lab books devoted to them. This all starts in 19 61 examination of MDA, 62 of MDA. So this is like the beginning of the 60s, the first 3 years. In 1960 we have experience with mescaline and TMA, then 61 MDA, 62 MMDA. So in the first 3 years we're already there. And after those experiments with also some other structures that are not really, from our contemporary perspective, worth any attention, but he could not have known that, right? Various minor structures now forgotten or disregarded, like DMMA, MTDA, MEDA, and so on. He also has some experiments in 63 with Salvia divinorum, and then there is a very interesting series of structures, yes, which seem to have taken a rather large amount of time, namely structures such as MEM, MME, MEE, EMM, yeah. So there is a whole series. They are described in PIHKAL in the entry for MTM, and they were completely abandoned later on. But in the notebooks, starting from 1963, they have taken a very large amount of time and experiments, but they were later disregarded as. But he couldn't have known. Yes, so they are listed and even in the index at the beginning of the lab books as one of the most, at least space-wise and time-wise, most important compounds to have been researched at the time. And then finally we arrive at DOM, or generally the DOX family. And this is the end of the 60s. Well, of course, DOM was discovered at the beginning, already in 63. And there are very amazing, beautiful notes and astounding descriptions of excitement, amazement, and really. This was the thing that he was looking for. You can see that in this was one of the first breakthroughs, one of the first amazing discoveries, and then there was a series of publications. Of course, there was this famous case of the entrance of DOM into the underground club scene, and as STP it was distributed, and then this infamous situation of various problems with this substance were described by Sasha in various statements of his. So the problem of DOM and STP, I think, has to be discussed by us, and then various other compounds from DOX family were investigated, and in the 60s, including DOB in 67 and so on, others in the 70s, and we end up with, I think, what we should discuss at the end. Finally, the so-called classic ladies, and then so in the late 60s he started examining them, researching them. So this is what I suggest we could do today, and yeah. So this is my idea, and if you agree, Itka, we can just step by step try going into details. Or if you have any other comments about this general outlook, please, perhaps we can do this right now.
Yeah, I would like to mainly invite everyone to join and talk about some interesting things that you may have also yourself discovered or know that are, follow-up discoveries on these topics, because there's just potentially things that are literally coming out from these very early stages of research. So if there's anything that you just find interesting, please just speak, because I think that would be very interesting to have interactions among each other. about the
Agreed.
chemistry and the molecules or whatever comes out of that, and the pharmacology of theirs.
Yes, agreed. So having stated this, if anybody wants to comment, please, and anytime feel free to speak. What do you think, Itka, about the general outlook? Do you have any comments? We have. Yeah.
Yes. One interesting thing, I think, that was the paper that Trout put together on DOM and how this ended up in 20 milligram tablets in Golden Gate Park for the, what was it, one of the INs. 1967 was the summer of INs, love INs, be INs. And it's simply because it kind of illustrates Sasha's essential rascalness. If you go back and look at almost every video lecture that he ever did, he addresses how his compound, which had not been published or patented, was discovered. So he changes the story a little bit over time, and often he addresses the question before anybody asks it, and he basically is lying. So it took a couple iterations to come out in 2010 at the MAPS conference, when it was in San Jose. They had kind of like a Shulgin dinner for everybody to kind of celebrate his work in life. And Nick Sand, the orange sunshine chemist, told the story that not too many people that were actually there kind of caught what he was saying. And Nick claimed that they wanted to make acid to give to everybody at this, at the I forget which inn it was, Love Inn or B Inn. One of them was in the early part of the year. I think the one where they distributed it was in summer. Nick Sand claimed that they couldn't get a hold of any ET, so they figured they'd go to Sasha and talk to him, and obviously he didn't give any ET, but he gave him a little index card with the synthesis of DOM. That part kind of came out first, and then later when Tim Scully, who taught Nick Sand how to make the LSD, heard that story, he said, that's not what happened either. He said, yeah, we went to Sasha's, he gave us the index card, he also gave us a 50-gram sample, and they were making it in their Denver lab that was across from the zoo. It's a lab that eventually got busted, and they couldn't get the crystallization done in time. They're having trouble crystallizing the salt, and so they ended up tableting up sample that Sasha gave him, which he just kind of never admitted. And the DA certainly must have known that this is somehow tied to Sasha. He only talked about it publicly. He did like a little lecture for some chemists down in Silicon Valley, I think. And that's one of the, I don't know how this got out there. Maybe somebody heard me talking about it. He just kind of rushes it off real quick in most of these lectures. He was a rascal, for sure. I mean, this could have derailed his whole career.
Yeah.
This is... I assume the DEA suspected it, but he also did stuff for them, and Bob Seeger was basically his best friend who ran the DEA's West Coast laboratory out here. He wasn't a cap guy. He just ran the laboratory as a lab guy. That was kind of his best friend. And, this is a very interesting story. I think I have the paper. I think it's been published by Trout and Paul Daly. He's on the paper, too. Excellent paper, and Trout is nearing the end of the exhaustive bibliography of everything ever published about DOM. That part is nearing finish, but also Ariadne comes out of the 10 classic ladies, which for people who don't know, there's 10 unique hydrogens in DOM. Sasha didn't really know why the potency was so much higher here. And so he systematically made the compound where he swapped out each of those nitrogens with a methyl group, and he went around. That's what the 10 classic ladies are. And he was just exploring the sorrow of what was going on here, trying to kind of figure it out. Some of the 10 classic ladies, Juno specifically, he finished. It's still in the archive. As far as I know, no one's really tried that.
Okay.
And then the other one that comes out of the 10 classic ladies is, of course, Ariadne. A compound perhaps a little ahead of its time. Sasha had a good friend at Bristol Myers during this time, and at some point in the early 70s, he gave a lecture, and Bristol Myers got very interested in this compound. This is pre-Prozac, before 1977. Antidepressants aren't exactly the giant moneymaker for pharmaceutical companies that they became, you know, by the end of the 70s. So Bristol Myers kind of, just like Sasha, they didn't know what to call Ariadne. Because they kind of ended up with, Sasha ended up calling it kind of an antidepressant or something. Bristol Myers ran it all the way through phase 2 FDA trials and before abandoning it. They didn't abandon it because it wasn't working out. It's a very complicated story that I won't go into, but it did things that they didn't know how to label, like all the old maze running monkeys that they had that just wouldn't run any more mazes. After they gave them Ariadne, they were suddenly dying to run the maze again. And so it ended up coming, I forget what the exact name was, but some kind of geriatric something other. Basically, it's just like made old people engaged in shuffleboard and checkers again. I think had this compound come out now, it would have been considered a psychoplastogen or a plastogen, 4th-gen psychedelic, one of these weird words that, and it's actually probably a pretty useful compound. I think it's super interesting. Anyway, just good things there.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. It was very insightful. Itka?
If I may.
Oh yeah, please.
First of all, hi Itka and dzień dobry, panie Andrzeju. But my question, or maybe not so much of a question, because the answer is not known. Since our interest was always grounded in the essential oil compounds, I'm still considering what the actual use the plants have for those compounds, for these polyalkoxybenzenes, like mescaline, like apiol, like safrole. Because as far as I know, this is not really known. And there has been one paper published that I know sent in the chat by the Viktor Semenov group that we have mentioned in our talk with Hamilton. And they screen those compounds for antioxidative properties. But I don't really buy it. Like I don't think that is their purpose. As usually in plants and generally in phytochemistry, phenols and polyphenols are used as antioxidants, and so there seems not to be any use to alkylate them, because then they cannot act as antioxidants, and that's sort of what they saw also, that reading from the abstract, the penta-alkoxy substituted nova-apiol, which is they made it synthetically from apiol, showed antioxidant activity in mouse brain homogenates, whereas in mouse erythrocytes it exhibited a marked pro-oxidant effect. So I feel like this sort of serves as proof that these compounds don't seem to exist in those plants for antioxidative effects. And I think this sort of comes back to the discussion about psilocybin. Like, there has been so much discussion about why psilocybe mushrooms contain it, right? And I don't think anyone has given a definite answer. So it's just sort of an insight, because I don't know any of us can ever answer it, and it doesn't really have to even have an answer. It may have just evolved spontaneously, and by the lottery of evolution, ended up staying in those compounds, staying in those plants, right? Maybe it's just for the smell. Who knows?
Okay, thanks. Any comments on this? Yitka, Mark?
There's always the question, like, is it to protect the plant, all these amines because they're bitter, or it can be all kinds of things. It can be a mixture of reasons, or even considerations of especially the alkaloids are there because they are active in humans. There can also be that link in nature. They are actually meant to induce these states of consciousness in human mind. It's just, I think we're just so far away from understanding the complexity and the interconnectedness. And it can also be all of these things in this beautiful harmony and linkage together. I don't know either. And it's something that pops up constantly in everyone's minds. But do you have your personal preference, or like what do you think could be the case, or is there even a way to research it, to study whether that hypothesis is true or not? Have you thought about it? Because you have done this area of chemistry a lot, so I guess you might have thought about this.
Yeah, I'm not a phytochemist, so it is. I think whenever we're talking about phytochemistry, or whenever we're talking about evolution in this context, it is very difficult to use the word purpose. Like, even when I was back in high school, my teacher would scold me for asking what the purpose of this particular transformation was. When in reality it could just be completely random, and could have just stayed in the plant for reasons that aren't really rational, right? Just like as artifacts. But it doesn't seem to be the case here. Like, I don't really believe that this can be the case here, because there is just such huge variety of these compounds that have a very, very similar scaffold. Mm-hmm. It's the allylbenzene aromatic motif, and then we've added alkoxy substituents. But the thing is that you never really see any substituents longer than one carbon. Like, if you watch these compounds carefully, it's always methoxys, it's always methylene dioxys, which are basically just one carbon connecting two oxygens, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think I've seen, maybe some of you can help me out with this, but I don't think I've ever seen any alkoxylated natural products with this structural motif, like allylbenzenes, that have longer carbon chains. So my guess is that since there are only a couple of enzymes capable of these transformations, which are those hydroxylases that will first introduce hydroxys to these rings, then to be methylated by some methyltransferases. Then, just because of this sort of lack of enzymatic machinery in those plants, I think that's the reason that the compounds are so limited. So it's not only a fact of the enzyme that would have to be different for the alkylation, but also the substrate. Like, whenever we're dealing with acetylations, for example, with coenzyme A, right? Then for another carbon chain, the substrate that would deliver the extra carbon would have to be different. And I don't think that plants were just capable of having this different substrate, even if the enzymatic process could be possible. But for the reason why they exist, I have no clue, and I find this really fascinating. And I don't think there is an easy way to say why they would exist. Yeah. I just saw a message from Sean. Hi, Sean. Do you have any ideas regarding further research to discover purpose behind allobenzene structures. Well, I think that's what Viktor Semenov has been doing for the last 15 years of his life. If you see this guy's ResearchGate page, I think he would be the best person to ask. Maybe I think I should talk to him, and maybe for the next seminar I'll get you guys the answer if I don't please your mind, Bing. Because
That's and what you said, how maybe they cannot even incorporate different or bigger substituents to metabolize. I was immediately reminded of this research by, for example, Jochen Gartz with the mushroom substrates, where they introduce different tryptamines and see whether they can be still phosphorylated, which they could. And so I wonder if, I'm not aware whether this similar research has been done on some kind of phenethylamine structures or, these molecules or not, maybe not. Or maybe it's just not so known and I haven't really digged into it. But that could be one way to figure out whether nature has the capability of actually doing this or not, if only the substrate is present or the necessary molecule components are present.
Yeah, that could be interesting. I'm not sure if it's possible in the case of mushrooms, it's sort of a bit of a simpler thing going on, because the only stuff that's going on is the hydroxylation phosphorylation sequence, right, from the tryptamine scaffold. For those compounds, you'd have to introduce, because these plants are not enzymatically using ethyl bromide or whatever. They have to have an activated complex that has the ethyl group connected to. Okay, I should probably not say anything about that, because I don't have the knowledge about the biosynthesis. Yeah, I will read up on this, and maybe I'll do a literature search regarding if such doping is possible, because that could be really fascinating,
right,
and maybe a really nice way to synthesize those weird phenethylamines
that are very inaccessible otherwise. Yeah, I'll do the same. Let's compare notes.
Okay, cool. I'll talk to you on Signal maybe later.
Yes.
Yeah.
One thing I think that it seems apparent to me is that science in general kind of has a tough time with why questions. I mean, what's the universe? How is it operating? Seem easier to answer than why the universe. It seems common in nature with evolution that as long as the mutation doesn't cause an immediate detrimental effect to the organism, there's a tendency for that mutation to stick around. And I don't even know how you would go about why. I think it would probably, discovering that might involve some kind of chance encounter with the reason. These secondary metabolites, what are they all for?
Well, and that's generally the attitude of, so to speak, hacking the system. Has the system been designed in order to be hacked, to so to speak, change its interior workings, or has it been designed for some purpose, and hacking is only a kind of side effect, as a possibility, because the system is left open, right? So when you design a system, you can introduce some possibilities of changing that have not been even designed or planned, but they are possible because of the open structure of the system. Yeah, so that's I think the entire thing that Shulgin was doing. I mean, we cannot really ask, or we cannot expect having the question answered whether it was all designed with a purpose. Is it as the philosophers say, teleological system oriented towards a purpose, We all know that most evolutionary theorists nowadays assume that there is no telos, even though Aristotle and classical theorists assumed, including in particular the theologians. All the theologians assume, starting with Aristotle and to old Thomistic beliefs, that there is a goal to all this, and this goal, this telos, is the achievement of some apocalyptic consciousness, either of human or of the universe. And you remember Shulgin himself stated in his description of +4 that if +4 was attainable for everyone just by ingesting a particular compound, the evolution of the human race and of the universe would be at its end, which is like the famous Hegelian claim that there is an end of history possible, and that even as all those millenarists and apocalyptics have said, it is coming, it is to come, and Hegel said no, it has already arrived. So this problem of the telos, of the possibility of the telos of human evolution, whether it was incorporated there, all those characteristics, inner details of or inner workings of the structure of human mind, or of not only human mind, of the nature of humans, including the biological purpose of various alkaloids or whatever else we are using or abusing or misusing, yes, or hacking against the grain, against the designed purpose. This all stands on an assumption that there was a purpose, that there is a purpose. But what if there is none, as you say? What if it is a completely random evolutionary system that has no purpose at all, and it is like in the modern theories of autopoiesis, it is a self-creating system that has no purpose other than its own self-sustaining, yes? And it follows various possible paths, explores them, and those which are fruitful, according to some criterion, are then explored, yes? Including the system that is only designed in order to sustain and somehow enlarge or somehow proceed or develop itself, right? So there doesn't have to be any purpose. Like when you, by analogy, when you hack a computer system, the system is not designed to be hacked. It is designed to fulfill some function, to perform some function. But you can hack it in order to have something else out of it, right? Or another analogy is the Freudian analogy, that there is the sexual system that fulfills the function of reproduction, but as Freud says, there is a usage that is against the goal of reproduction of the sexual organs, right? So he says it's Zielgehemmte Liebe. Love somehow gehemmt, restraint in reference to its original purpose or goal, right? So you can say humans have hacked the system of reproduction by using it against its purpose, and we have also hacked various aspects of the neurological system. Yeah, we have got with Shulgin and others, we have managed to discover the low level of the operation of various neurotransmitters, and then not only discovered the analogical structures, compounds in plants that were the byproduct of the metabolism of various plants, whether they were used there or not, or just randomly produced. This is another question, but we found that they are produced by nature, including mescaline as the alkaloid of peyote cactus, and then we have hacked it. Okay, we found out that there are neurotransmitters of similar structure in the human brain, and then we created others. Whether the system was designed in order to allow them to be found or to be used, I don't think we can ever know. But we have factually discovered that they exist, and even those that have never existed work in this system. This is even more extraordinary than the question whether there is a purpose in nature in essential oils, as you have asked. Is there a purpose in the human mind or in the human brain such that there is a possibility of designing new neurotransmitters or compounds that serve, by analogy, the same function as the endogenous neurotransmitters? This is a very strange question that I don't think can be answered on the basis of neurochemistry or neurobiology. And this is fundamental for Shulgin's research, that we do things that are by analogy structurally equivalent and have some effect. What effect? We don't know, but there is a possibility of having an effect on this low level, yes? Without chemistry, with only plants, yes, as the original use of plants in various religious rituals, we could only have used what nature produced. Now, since more than since about the 19th century, for more than 100 years, we are able to change those structures radically and consciously, yes, and examine them, and they do work. Is this planned? Is this designed to be possible? It is possible, but this is just hacking. Is it just doing on low levels experimenting with something that was not meant to be done, with what was not meant to be discovered, or was it waiting for us all the time, all those compounds that Shulgin and others have discovered? What do you think? It's a philosophical question, of course, but what is your feeling as chemists? Are those compounds waiting for you? Were they designed to work this way, or it's just some kind of discovery of the unknown that was never designed to be discovered?
Well, I think, assuming there's a purpose in design, assumes there's a God, and apparently he's very shy. Hard to locate.
Well, design doesn't have to be by a designer, personal designer, you know.
Well, I think a purpose would imply some idea from the start that's driving things. I think it's a difficult question. And I don't know how you would go about discovering whatever God is referring to, or a designer, or
well, that's the Platonic idea, that you first have a model and then you have a creation out of the model, yeah. But still, I'm not sure if in order to have a purpose or a telos, you need to have a personal designer that imposes this purpose upon the creature, upon the creation, right? So there might be a telos, a purpose, a goal, without somebody imposing it, right? I think, yeah. In a kind of, like in natural processes. In natural processes, you can have a goal or a purpose of something. It can fulfill a function, and this function is the goal of all those processes that fulfill this function. That otherwise they would not have taken place. But that's the question. We in various plant metabolic processes, we have, as far as I know, alkaloids that don't fulfill any function for the plant, but they are active for example, on the human mind, human brain, right? So this is somehow touched upon here in the question about the essential oils, right?
Yeah, my
Here's a.
sorry.
Go ahead, Todd.
All right, thanks. My opinion sort of touches on. I will preface by saying that it is a very atheistic opinion, but I guess we can swap out the God for combinatorics.
Yeah.
Like, I think when you start to study chemistry and of most neurotransmitters, and therefore the receptors that bind to them and have some particular binding pockets that allow for those motifs to bind and activate through some other mechanism. When you start to notice that, and then when you start to notice that every organism in the world, and probably outside the world if such exists, is based on those benzene rings just because of purely quantum chemical effects that are the stabilization of the sp2 hybridized carbon atoms, then you notice that it must have been this way, that we will find overlap between structural compounds like lignins, like cellulose, like stilbenoids. Like, we will find overlap between those things that act on CNS and those things that don't. So maybe I'm not explaining it as well as I could, but basically, you look at, for example, a compound called coniferol alcohol. I don't know if I can send. I can't send an image, but it has a structure very, very similar to eugenol, and eugenol is also an essential, also a phenylpropene, and this same compound is not only used for biosynthesis of eugenol, but also for biosynthesis of, for example, coumarins. And from coumarins you can find umbelliferones and other thousands of secondary metabolites of plants. By the way, if you like the smell of tonka beans, then you'll probably like coumarin. But my point is, because those compounds are so simple in structure, it is basically just one ring, one sort of alkyl chain, and some substituents. Because they are so simple, and because our neurotransmitter systems and our CNS is also very primitive in the way that it only accepts very simple neurotransmitters that are also produced from the same amino acids that plants produce their own secondary metabolites from. There must have been overlap. So I don't think we have to even talk about purpose when it's sort of like having a hat with some balls, with some colored balls, and then we start taking the balls out of the hat, and by some chance we just get two balls of the same color. And it all makes sense when you go back in time to times when every organism in the world was based on the same amino acids and the same secondary metabolites. And only plants had specialized to some particular ones, humans have specialized to some particular ones, but because this chemical space... Oh, yeah, that's my main point. Forget all I said before. Main point is the chemical space, the chemical space of biology, of maybe, let's say, aromatic biology. I'm not saying about some very complex terpenoid structures that can be formed by plants, but I'm talking about aromatic biology. The chemical space of aromatic biochemistry is so limited that there must have been overlap, and I think that's what we're seeing now. This overlap, like everyone sees the similarity between the indole scaffold and the methylene dioxide scaffold.
Yeah,
it is obviously not that similar. Like it looks the same, it seems the same. It is geometrically almost the same, but looking from the perspective of like medicinal chemistry perspective, the NH is, well, the electron donating capabilities of the NH are different from the electron donating capabilities of the two oxygen atoms, and also the electronics of the phenyl ring, which also influence the pi-pi stacking interactions in the binding pocket, are also different. But this even small amount of overlap was apparently enough for us to find those similarities. Okay, now I'm shutting up now. Thanks.
This is very interesting, because one thing is an overlap, another thing is a possibility of development of these structures, not only of the overlap of things produced by nature and produced endogenously by the human brain, but even because we have the same evolutionary origin, and because we are based on the same system that uses the benzene ring as its basis. Of course, this mutual origin, so to speak, explains the overlap, as you said, without any necessity of a purpose. All right, but what about the possibility of modifying the structures and exploring possibilities that are not a part of something that already exists within those biological systems?
And in what way? Like, how should we expand this?
That's not a question of merely overlapping, but of kind of having an open system that allows for modifications that still work, that are valid, even though they have never existed in nature, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's sort of what we were doing with medicinal chemistry, though, right?
Yeah.
We are synthesizing compounds that have never been seen in nature. Even what I find fascinating is that a lot of compounds used today that you can buy those in pharmacies have functional groups that have never been seen in nature. Well, maybe I'm being too strict in those words, but for example, drugs with trifluoromethyl groups, they have been designed for the very specific purpose of being electron withdrawing. And I think there are some, I'm not sure if CF3, but there are some fluorinated benzenes for sure in nature. I think that sort of serves as the best proof that we as humans have already sort of escaped this natural space, and that we are really good at finding those open spaces, like you mentioned, in order to explore possibilities that have never been done by nature. And while we are much worse at synthesizing very complex compounds, or like especially stereochemically complex compounds than nature, I think we're much better at sort of doing the same thing that lifted us from the caves, or took us out of the caves tens of thousands of years ago, is taking things that we were never supposed to touch, and then using them for our purposes, like what trifluoromethyl sulfonic anhydride or whatever. This was never supposed to see the light of day, but we did use it.
Yeah, I think by analogy, it is not only the question of hacking the neurotransmitter system and exploring various possibilities that have not been available so far, but by analogy, the entire progress of physics, chemistry, and technology is based on the fact that we are constantly discovering some new aspects of nature that have not even been thought of or realized. Yeah, the entire computing industry, this things that are happening on our eyes, telephones, microprocessors, transistors, even before, quantum computing now, but it's all something unbelievable. Yes, when you look at it from, for example, from the perspective of Newton, right? Or even at the beginning of the 20th century, we couldn't have envisaged such a possibility. Yes, not to mention even thinking about its practical consequences. I mean, the way technology has developed. So technology as a mere construction of tools for humans, and not, as Shulgin says, tools for accessing the possible hidden layers of human mind, but external tools that we use to communicate, to move, to perform various functions. Yes, it's impossible what nature holds open and available for us. As though one could say, and there were philosophers who suggested such a possibility, as though nature was not a closed set of rules and laws, but as though nature is a kind of subject, not merely objective entity that has a closed structure that we just discover layer by layer, getting lower and lower, deeper and deeper, but as though it was not a closed system that is already finished, and but that it, so to speak, opens up as long or while we examine it. Yeah, so it is something that opens up to you as at the moment when you get closer to it and discover its aspects. This is, I think, suggested by Shulgin when he says that whenever he finds a new compound, it's completely undetermined. It has no property. The property appears on the moment of first experience, and then it is verified with others, with the research group, and then it's, so to speak, objectivized. But I think this is a very controversial statement from the perspective of scientific theory, that those compounds that he examines have no properties at all before he examines them. So he, so to speak, imposes them, or co-creates them by his own first experience of those compounds that have never existed. This is very strange, because normally we would assume that certain compounds have certain objective properties that only are discovered. But here they are, so to speak, co-created. And I think something similar was suggested by Heidegger when he said, this is also, I mean, strange or not very intuitive, but he said that the laws of gravity, before Newton defined them, were neither false nor true. You know, because we assumed they were always false. We just did not define them. Yes, but he says they were beyond the opposition of true and false. So this is perhaps the way nature as a subject that is opened up to us in our relation to nature as during the process of scientific discovery relates to us by opening up itself for definition and by means of discovery. Okay, so I will stop here because maybe it's enough. But there is unless you want to comment on what I said, which would be...
well, I think there's some connection to, Sasha described this effect where when, say, a new heart medicine gets approved and people start using it, on top of whatever effects this drug has, something that looks like people's expectation that this new drug is better causes the drug to have a certain efficacy in the beginning that eventually starts to lower over time. Is something related to the placebo effect, which I've always felt is often looked at from a perspective of a problem, but when you have like a pharmaceutical or placebo is 70% as effective as a placebo, there's certainly something about, to me it seems like, there's this assumption that our senses and our mind are giving us an accurate picture of the world outside our skull, which I think is perhaps easily argued that this is not the case. Just for example, the electromagnetic spectrum. We are not aware of most of that spectrum. Visible light. You don't sense the radio waves going through you. X-rays. You don't notice those. You can't sense them really. Sasha also had that famous comment about why do these drugs do what they do? And he says, one possibility is that animals, humanity, however you want to say it, at one point did have these endogenous compounds that cause this effect. The receptor is still there. Sasha said the receptor wasn't the problem. The endogenous ligands were the problem. And he makes the illustration of the first time you looked at a saber-toothed tiger and got distracted by the beautiful patterns on its teeth, you were then removed from the gene pool. And so that over time, the only people left to breed were people who didn't have this endogenous compound that was causing a psychedelic effect.
Yeah, I think there is a fragment in the Varieties of Psychedelic Experience lecture that relates to several of the themes and threads that we have mentioned here, and I think we could perhaps listen to this short fragment. It deals with several questions, including exploring compounds not known in nature. So let me just perhaps play it now, if you don't mind. It's fragment number 4.
The depressants, they abandoned it for financial reasons, but not for pharmacological ones. So it's interesting to see that I was looking for the wrong thing. There's a case for my report in relationship with the chemical is totally wrong. I was looking for something, and I was not getting it, and I was not being open to what was there. I learned a lesson from that, and now I'm willing to listen a little bit more instead of calling the shots when I get into new materials. But this is alpha ethyl. Stop the psychedelic experience. Then get back into what is it that mescaline has other than that? It's got beautiful groups hanging over here like shrubbery. What else is in nature that has similar shrubbery? Nutmeg, parsley, APO, dill APO, marvelous essential oils. So into the spice cabinet, hauling out all these marvelous things, distilling them, getting marvelous oils, and converting them to substitute amphetamines. And by golly, they're becoming, almost everyone is active. The methylene doxy, the one from sacral became MDA. The one with the methoxymethyl doxy became MMDA. I found dill APO, I called it tetramethoxy or methylene doxy dimethoxy. I've had a host of letters. DMMDA, I can give you letters all ending with A. They were absolutely fascinating. Then he said, well, all of these are active, but the thing is, all of them have groups can easily be taken off by the body. They all have groups that are hooked through an oxygen. What if you took out the oxygen and put a group directly on the ring? Well, this is not found in nature. This is new territory. So in the lab, the tweezers take off the oxygen, jam on a methyl group, and you have something that now is a material that is totally unnatural. It's the first time I'm getting into something that is totally away from a natural guide. My argument is this material with this absent this metabolic position of metabolic fragility, and having really a fixed group on there, this could go two ways. This compound could be a really potent compound because you can't metabolically get rid of the group at a position where it's necessary, or it could be totally without activity because it's getting in there, but getting rid of the group is necessary to be active. I don't know. Totally unknown. So I go in there cautiously. If it's going to be really active, I'm going to have a fascinating compound. If it's totally inactive, I might have something of the therapeutic value. Maybe it's an antagonist. Maybe it's something to be used to treat a person who's overdosed on something that is active. Get this jam in the lock with a key that doesn't quite work right, and maybe protect a person against poisoning or against overdose.
Okay. Yeah, this is what I wanted you to hear, maybe comment upon. So this is the moment where we will touch upon something completely unknown, not known in nature, yes. And you have no way of knowing what it does, what it would do. But it's possibly active. How come? How come? Yes. to what extent we can somehow predict the activity basing on this experience that we have had so far with examining various structure activity relationships, and to what extent it is all just pure experiment where you know nothing and you have to discover it everything by chance with blindfolded, you know.
I think there has been. Oh, sorry.
Oh, wait, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I think there have been a lot of attempts at sort of the same method of prediction, like the AlphaFold software, for example, for protein folding. But the issue with predicting compound affinities, which, let's say it like that, the affinities can be predicted with quite good accuracy, but then the effect after administration of the compound cannot be easily predicted. Like you can very well predict if some compound will bind to, for example, the PGP pump, whether it will get removed from the brain, whether it will bind to the hERG channels, for example, which cause cardiotoxicity, whether it will bind to some other mechanisms that our bodies have to get rid of the compound as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But this doesn't. I feel like the issue here is just the complexity. Like, so you can expect the compound to bind, for example, to the 5-HT2A receptor, but then it will have a completely different. If a person takes it, it will have a completely different effect if it also binds to the 5-HT2B receptor or the 5-HT2C receptor, or if it is also an oxytocin releasing agent, or if it binds to some other promiscuous, what we call promiscuous binding pockets, which can accept a lot of different compounds with various structures, just because the design of their binding pocket. So yeah, we can predict this, but our predictions are pretty bad. I think that's my take.
So now we have a much more advanced knowledge of the way the human mind, human brain works, and we have models, we have computer models where we can use them for the sake of prediction. At the time Sasha Shulgin was working in the 60s, there were no such models, there were no such technologies, and maybe it's only this factor, this crucial factor, that he had to do it basing on what he called art, intuition and experience combined, right? But at the same time, one can say that without his experiments, without his pioneering work, this knowledge that we have nowadays would not have been possible, right? So you see on the window, in the window that I have shared, there is his note where he takes mescaline and says, what if I were to put this group onto this compound which keeps the amine from being removed metabolically? Okay, so, and then he, of course, we all know what he did, but this were the beginnings. Now we have much more advanced knowledge, much more advanced models of prediction. At the time he had, this is I think why he calls it art, a combination of experience, knowledge, chemical knowledge, some is very simple model of the operation of human brain, and an experience of altering the structure of those compounds on a very basic level, right? And it was all done, so to speak, manually, without any simulations, without any predictions, right? Now this model is no longer valid, the model of blind intuitive experiments, or is it?
I've heard several times that as if in a certain nostalgia or almost a sadness feeling that there is not going to be research the way that Sasha did it, because we now have these tools that are, as you say, predicting things for us. But as sort of just mentioned, the complexity is so enormous, and we are nowhere near to actually understanding how this, yes, the original binding of a molecule to a receptor somewhere in the brain and doing a next step and then signaling further and then doing other steps. And there's this cascade of potential waterfalls, what can happen on the molecular and neurobiological and neuronal levels that is just still so far away from our understanding of what happens just on the side of the brain, if we say like physically. And then also another leap, how does the brain activities correlate to the subjective experience, the inward? I don't think we're anywhere close, honestly. And I feel the methodology that Sasha pioneered is still as valid as it was back then. And still, I think it's still the only way to actually discover what these compounds do, if our interest is what they do to the mind, which I think for many is the case, not for everyone. Of course, there's all sorts of other effects, what they do on the just brain, if we look at, neurobiology. But if we're interested in the subjective effect, I would bet that in our lifetimes, there will not be a technology that will be able to predict this.
I would agree. I mean, there's one sure way to tell what a compound does to a human mind. You must use the human mind.
Yeah.
And then also there's the other aspect. Well, maybe we can learn objectively, or like learn, okay, this compound, this does this and that, and we learn about it. But then, at least that's how I view it. There's also the process of having experienced it that is very important, and the subjective experience is only done, as Mark just said, through actually experiencing it. And the change itself intrinsically is, I feel, very important, not just reading about it or just sharing about it in words, but actually going through that process, through that mind, each and one and every one of us, is pretty much a process of its own, and that certainly cannot be substituted or displaced by something else.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, that during most of Sasha's research, there was like 2 serotonin receptors known about. Mm-hmm. I think we're up to around 14 now. You have things like the endocannabinoid system, which wasn't even discovered until 1996. We didn't even know what was in cannabis that was causing the effect. It was not an alkaloid. Everybody's traditionally looking for alkaloids. That remained a mystery until the mid-late 60s. So I think it's probably wise to remember that our knowledge of possible targets in the brain is incomplete. It's not apparent that we have discovered all receptor subtypes or even receptor systems. Serotonin wasn't really being looked at for much, except that we knew it was in blood vessels and caused a contraction. So, with computational stuff, in my opinion, generating 20,000 leads is kind of like not really helpful, because now you have 20,000 compounds to run through a human brain to discover activity. I mean, I think you would more quickly move along your path if you followed Sasha's method. I'm probably one of the least knowledgeable about anything chemistry. I don't know what's happening with electrons. I can't do that. I'm strictly like kind of working off my experience to identify which way I should go. which is then informed by the creation of a molecule, its effects, and then there's also this factor of the subject who's taking the drug. Do they recognize something in the experience? Are they missing something about the experience? I mean, Sasha's a great example. So Sasha's only really interested in a psychedelic effect. And so the majority of the compounds in PIHKAL, or a great number of them, Sasha kind of brushes off as not interesting, and he moves to another part of the molecule to start making changes. But he makes comments in PIHKAL that he's aware that there is something about these ones he keeps brushing off. There's something interesting there, and he can't see it, and he knows he can't see what it is because of his perspective of how he's looking, what he's looking for. And it just happens to be a coincidence that he never runs out of new psychedelics, and so he doesn't ever circle back around to many of these. But almost all of these compounds, and there's exceptions, but many of the compounds Sasha finds uninteresting. If you go to the experience reports, you'll find things like mild intellectual stimulation, superb body feel, no anorexia, no sleep disturbances, feels like 100 mics of LSD. I mean, to me, this is amazing. Ariadne is a great example.
Yeah.
Takes a downturn. Here's one of these alpha ethyl substituted phenethylamines that is extremely interested, as long as you're not trying to discover psychedelics. Trying to discover psychedelics is definitely a turn away from DOM. This is kind of my main area of interest, is kind of like the Lameramines, I call them. Daryl Lemaire's kind of exploration of these tweedios, where he's making unsymmetric 2,5 substitutions. So ethyl alpha. So it's taking all the 2,5 compounds and either turning the 5 into an alpha. So these, he only got to the the ethyl ones, and Daryl was more concerned with, like, for lack of a better word, a smart pill, a cognitive enhancer, study aids, non-state specific study aids, basically. The work I've been doing the last 3 years is on these 5 propyl. So let's see, tweedios is 2 ETOs, is a goofy way of saying 2 ETO, which were the first ones Daryl explored. It's now known that you can't have too much bulk at the 2, or it doesn't seem to fit in the receptor. But you can do a lot of things at the 5. My gut feeling and my experience is that the 5-ethoxy versions of all the Daryl Lemaire drugs didn't quite completely kill psychedelic or stimulant activity. It also increasing the length of that chain at 5 also seems to have the effect of the doubling or even more the chronology of the drug. So this was problematic because some of the, like, if you read the subject reports from Daryl's subjects, many of the drugs ended up with nicknames like Eternity, Infinity, because they lasted like 60 hours, and the ethyl substitution for the methoxy, the ethoxy, didn't quite kill the psychedelic activity for that not to be a problem. So in 2022, I made 5-propoxy 2CB, which is not psychedelic. It's not a stimulant. It doesn't really have any stimulant properties. I found it immediately interesting. You can tell, you can feel that you've taken something. There's no impairment. I have not been able to identify any impairment. None of the people that have tried it, you can drive. So then the question becomes, well, if you end up creating a drug that lasts 60 hours, but it lacks psychedelic properties, and it lacks stimulant properties, and it doesn't disturb your ability to sleep or eat, is this actually a problem? I mean, if your sodium channel blocker lasts 3 days, is that a problem? I mean, you just take less pills. So there is this factor of the first few people who try a drug. A great example is 2CD. Here's a compound Sasha labels pharmacological tofu. and it pretty much never recovers from that designation. You know, Sasha's like, it doesn't really do much on its own, but it seems to enhance other drugs. Well, I don't really understand where he's coming from, because 2CD, in my opinion, is one of Sasha's best compounds, particularly at the low kind of Daryl Lemaire 5 to 10 milligram dosage. But it doesn't ever really gain traction. It's every bit as good as 2CB, in my opinion. And so there was some disagreement about the 5-propoxy 2CB lacking kind of classic psychedelic effects, where some people didn't see the utility. So, you know, the first few people who take it, kind of they are adding something. Even if it's just an opinion, it can become a kind of ingrained assumption. Is 2CB pharmacological tofu? I mean, that's not something you could prove one way or another. This is just an opinion about what you think about the effects. Yeah, just some thoughts.
Yep, thanks.
I also agree with you, Itka, when you said that our lack of knowledge is astounding. Like, I think that actually at the molecular level, we have the most knowledge about those compounds. We know that they bind to this particular receptor. We even know what they do after they bind to the receptor, that they activate some sort of a G protein related pathway or a beta arrestin pathway or whatever else. But we know nothing about what happens later. So whenever we go into this indeterminate sort of purgatory space of between the whole cell, between the neuron, and, well, maybe now, let's say between what happens in the cell, between the calcium levels, between the sodium channels, between the action potential and the actual subjective experience. So everything in between those two is unknown, as far as I'm aware. Like we can predict perfectly maybe if this compound. We even have photo-switchable 5-HT2A receptor agonists that can act on the G protein or the beta arrestin pathway, but we still know nothing about what actually in that receptor activation causes the psychedelic experience. Whenever you read anything about that, everyone just uses very hand-wavy, let's say, phrases like, okay, it acts on the visual cortex of the brain. What does that mean? I have no clue what that means. It basically says, well, it does something and we don't really know. So, and also replying to you, Mark, I am always scared of compounds that don't show activity, because when you think about SSRIs, for example, the most common antidepressant compounds in the world, prescribed to millions of people, they do nothing the moment you take them. Yes, they inhibit the certain transporter, but this has pretty much no pharmacological effect. This does nearly nothing. Most people don't recover from their depression for the first 3, 6, 7 days after they start taking their venlafaxine or whatever else. But what causes the effect is then the modification of transcription factors that influence that is the theory, at least, that influence the way that certain receptors are expressed on the cell bodies. So you can take a compound and feel nothing, but if you keep taking it for like 2 weeks, you will start seeing changes that, or you may start seeing changes that could never be predicted by any in vivo model, and that could never be predicted by any, let's say, ex vivo model, like by any in vitro model either, because it's not possible. Like the only reason why we know that SSRIs are are active was because we discovered them pretty much by chance. Like, if you tried to discover them, it's the same way that medicinal chemistry does things now, which is take a cell culture with some, for example, receptor with a phosphorescent, with a bound phosphorescent probe, and do some photoassay, for example. You would never see this activity. Very little pharma companies are interested in dosing the same compound for 3, 5, 6 weeks to the same cell body to see an effect that would be expected immediately. So I think that is sort of also the unexplored space that you, Andrzej, were talking about.
Yeah.
That it will be very difficult to ever get there because of the huge amount of work required. But I think it all stems from the complexity of the brain.
Yeah, but you are talking about the methodology, and of course, agreed. There are things that cannot be discovered by means of contemporary methods that are used in the industry. But still, what I've been asking is not merely whether this method holds and excludes the previous, let's say, manual, old school, intuitive methods as used by Shulgin, classical approach, let's say. But the question is whether my question was not merely about the various methodologies, the contemporary industrial one, so to speak, and the classical one that was used by Shulgin, but also about the model of or about the assumption of the structure-activity relationship, whether they are objectively tied to the structure and predetermined even before examining them. So this is the question. You remember my analogy about the laws of gravity in Newton. Like, before you experience, that's what Marx said, one has to use one's mind in order to see how something acts upon the mind. But what is this usage of one's mind? It's the experience itself. So the question is, even from the perspective of quantum physics, the question is whether an experience can be purely objective or whether it somehow imposes the subjective aspect upon the experienced object. And then I think this is how Shulgin himself perceives it. He does not perceive the compounds created, envisaged first, then synthesized, then examined as objectively existing entities that have some closed set of properties. He envisages them, he theorizes about them as some dialogically unfolding entities that have perhaps no fixed set of properties before one experiences them. And I think this is explicitly stated in many fragments. It's not a metaphor of a contact with something that is alive, vivid, or subjective. I think he consciously refers to a dialogical model of a dialogue or contact or co-creation by the subject that is experiencing a certain compound. And let me just quote him or play a short fragment from the Varieties of Psychedelic Experience lecture, and then maybe you would like to comment on it, because to me this is crucial. It's not merely a matter of method. It's a question of the way you experience compounds, the way our mind, the human mind, experiences certain compounds, objects, relates to them at the first moment of contact. And the first moments are crucial. I don't think it's merely about interpretation, or as Mark suggested, about the way we speak publicly and create a discourse. And this discourse that is created by those who first explore, first experience something, they create a set of prejudices. Certainly. Prejudices and expectations. Certainly. We create, those who create the discourse around a certain experienced object are responsible for setting a framework that will then be somehow sustained or changed, whatever. But it's not merely a question of interpretation. I think it's not only a question of speech and discourse, but it's a question of the way the structure acts upon the mind, which is not only something related or dependent upon the way we speak about it. So let me just quote Shulgin, all right? It's a fragment 3, the 10th minute, 10:50.
I mentioned 5 from Levine.
So, yeah, here it is. Please listen. This is like...
That's an interesting approach. The whole philosophy goes into the first dosage. But if you stop and think for a moment, that compound does not have a property, because no one tasted it. So you are in an interesting dialogue, in that you are going to not discover what a property is in the compound. It doesn't have a property. You can't discover what's not there. You're in a dialogue in that you are going to begin developing an agreement of what response you are going to have to the compound. And as you develop that agreement, you come in, say, you get a little surprise, a little nudge comes in from the right you weren't expecting. All right, it has its personality too, and you're not going to be totally in charge of the show. But on the other hand, you can also add your little thoughts to it. And the beauty of being able to give property to a compound is you stop thinking you can't be wrong. Because once you've given the property of the compound, look what other people do. They try the compound, they say, hey, he's right. You're confirmed. Or they'll say, hey, he's wrong. Where did I go wrong? And you're confirmed. So either way, what you give it as a sense of that, as the property of that compound, will in essence belong as agreement to you and to it. And I believe it sounds a little bit perhaps mystical. It sounds awfully mystical. But that's right. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. If it bothers you, we'll discuss it. Right. But it is a way in which you find this rapport, and it is a marvelous, marvelous area of exploration. It's truly an art, and it's an area that I have found in the 30 years to be totally exciting.
Okay, this is what I wanted to show you. He's very radical. He says that we are responsible for the properties. They are not defined before one experiences them. This is really a radical statement, don't you think?
Well, I think as far as at least compounds that elicit a classic psychedelic effect, just like LSD, for example, or in particular, what are the effects of LSD? It's very hard to define in any kind of concrete terms. It's very hard to. I don't know if you could do it. It doesn't have a lot of properties like an opioid. You can say that there's definite things that happen. LSD. I always liked John Lilly's kind of explanation, which was that there's like a introduction of static or noise to the system, and by causing that static or noise forces your mind to reevaluate things that it has relegated to assumptions about things, and the noise causes the brain to make a new assumption based on that information. But as far as I know, not even mydriasis is a consistent effect with LSD. The dilation of the pupils doesn't happen in 100% of the people who take it. That's strange. It can cause extreme euphoria. I would argue greater euphoria than, say, heroin. But not always. Sometimes it's quite terrifying. and not pleasant at all.
Yeah.
So there's, this is all just leading to the set and setting kind of paradigm, which is where you're at mentally and physically in the world is going to have a great effect on your experience of that compound. One other thing I was thinking about while you're talking is learning that the feeling we experience is love, learning the chemical process that is responsible for feelings of love doesn't really get you any closer to understanding love as an experience. It doesn't really, and I think the same is true kind of psychedelics, like knowing the receptors they're hitting or knowing about the receptors we know about that they're hitting often doesn't explain why 2CB is great or better than some other 2C or so I think that what we're dealing with is a bunch of relevant questions, or the relevance of such questions are the utility of these questions depends on how you're looking at psychedelics. Are you a chemist trying to kind of predict where you should go next to make changes that might be fruitful? Are you a therapist who's looking for effects that are suitable for therapy, which then involve things like chronology of the drug? Often you'll hear like, well, what the new psychedelic explosion, what they're looking for is, like a better LSD, which to me is a ridiculous question. Better how? This is one of the most perfect compounds, I think, most useful across a variety of applications. And usually if you press people who are talking like that, what it comes down to for a commercial company is maybe a shortening of the effects. Well, is that better for the patient, or is that just better for the doctor who's trying to treat people within an 8-hour day? Or maybe you can reduce it to 2 hours. You can, treat 3 patients a day, one day. So that's a useful investigation commercially, not necessarily for the patient, but and so, I think there's such a variety of reasons people employ psychedelics, personal, commercial, that I think the definition of what it is you're trying to do or what the utility of what you're hoping to do is essential to understand, at least about yourself, if you're trying to investigate this stuff. Otherwise, it leads to very confusing dialogue with others, I think. If a therapist is arguing with a chemist about the properties that would be beneficial in any line of research, they're going to argue if they don't realize they're looking for different things. They're both looking for, say, maybe a psychedelic. But if it lasts too long, if it has like the alefs, if the dosage is too variable across individuals, these can be discouraging or not, depending on what it is you think you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Sasha was looking for psychedelics, so he,
of course,
thinks alpha ethyl substitution is pointless. Ariadne would prove that different. And I think it's actually some low-hanging fruit is to make some alpha ethyl versions of, say, the magical half dozen, or as I call it, the magical baker's half dozen, because I put 2CB in back there. In my opinion, there's 7. 2CD should not have been left out. It's, in my opinion, for me, more useful than the 2CTs that are on that list, 2 and 7. I think it's probably fruitful, and it's been ignored because of what Sasha's referring to, which is this huge drop on psychedelic activity. But from my comparison of the 5-Pro-2CB and Ariadne, these compounds feel very similar. They're very similar in feel. There's a slight difference in that for me and most of the people who've tried both, I turned to contentagenesis. Ariadne generates a type of contentment with oneself and their environment that is interfering if you're trying to work. If you're very content, then the motivation to do anything is reduced. The 5-Pro just doesn't quite do that, and so it doesn't interfere with your ability to work or go about your day in the same way. I mean, kind of as a joke, I often say that Ariadne is great if you're retired, but you want the 5-Pro if you still got to get to work and make meetings and take care of the kids. And you don't want to be too content.
Yeah, but what about the dialogical aspect that was stressed in this fragment? Dialogue with the compound and establishment of its properties, whether you can define them or not. He says that at the beginning a compound does not have properties, and then it starts obtaining them, and therefore, this is a kind of metaphor perhaps, it has its personality too, he says, right? So there is a kind of relational model, not only a model of discovery of pre-existing properties or aspects or qualities, but of establishing them, or maybe even constituting them, right? In this initial moment, he says this first contact is crucial here. What do you think of it?
I feel like we're circling back to at least, like, sorry, maybe my mindset is just too materialistic, but I can only circle back to the feeling of that Mark mentioned about the discourse that is in the public space and maybe even in our own minds regarding those compounds. Like, I can only find an analogy that imagine you're going to an interview where you're the interviewer, but you don't know who your guest is. Like, the guest is dressed in, I don't know, he or she is a mummy, and you don't see them. Maybe you don't hear their voice; it's muffled, and then only in those circumstances you will be able to grasp what they have to say with the most objectivity, because otherwise everything else will cause you to establish a dialogue in which you are sort of biased.
Yeah, but maybe the objectivity is not the goal. I mean, it's just an assumption.
Right. It is not the goal. It would be the goal if our goal was only scientific, like purely rational and purely scientific, that, okay, I want to establish exactly what effects this and this compound has. But I don't think that is the, at least in most of users, I don't think that is the purpose when they use any psychoactive compounds.
You know what I mean? I mean that when Sasha is talking about the dialogue, he assumes a certain subjectivity, not an objectivity. You cannot have a dialogue with an object, right? So there is something behind. It's a very strange assumption. Maybe it's not merely a metaphor. That's just something I would like to suggest.
I think that's why trying compounds, not knowing what they are, was a completely different experience than just, for example, ordering or growing some psilocybin containing mushrooms and eating those. I feel like when you don't have any expectations, when you cannot really, when you have to establish the dialogue without any prior knowledge, this dialogue can be much more interesting, because the biases. Well, okay, I guess we're coming back to like a very opinionated, subjective area, like what is more interesting or what is more valuable. I don't think it's worth to judge on that.
But what Mark said is also crucial here in this context, because Sasha had a certain set of assumptions, and with different assumptions we can, using his own metaphor, re-establish this dialogue in a different way. Yes?
Yeah. I don't think I have anything more to say.
Right.
I think Sasha's sort of ideology with trying new compounds was one that was not really it was very novel. It seems like very obvious, okay, just make something and then eat it. But he had a sort of infrastructure, I think, in his mind, where even judging by the Shulgin index, like the Shulgin rating scale, he had still the scientific mind. He wanted to quantify things, but still he left some space for the subjective effects that cannot be sort of measured in the amount of stars or whatever, and that cannot be explained in words only. That's why I really enjoyed his report of MMDA, where he mentioned those mind-fleeting images, and I feel like it is sort of like with smells. When you take a bottle of unknown compound and then you smell it, it sort of is it's sort of a wavy Schrödinger cat situation. If the smell is not very characteristic, you will probably not be able to tell what it is. But then if someone tells you, for example, okay, now imagine an oak tree, or now imagine a bottle of Nutella, then suddenly the smell will start to fit like a key in the lock. And I think that could also be happening with those compounds. And I think that is what the re-establishment of the dialogue can be about. That's why I consider trying compounds without knowledge about them and with knowledge about them two completely different experiences.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna have to go soon,
Thank
but
you.
it was a really, really interesting discussion. So thanks.
Thanks a lot. I think we are going to finish in a moment. Please, Itka, Mark, or whoever else would like to add something to wrap up the discussion, or
Maybe I was curious when we earlier discussed the idea that humans have come beyond what nature is capable of doing, and now doing things that were not existing before. Well, I wonder if you, mainly chemists, but I guess it can be applicable to any area, if you ever felt like the human activity or your own activity is merely an extension or evolution or development of the natural process, or is it, something outside of nature, or, as Sasha mentioned, unnatural? Because I don't know, it's weird. Sometimes I feel like the same way that cactus catalyzes the making of certain alkaloids, the similar way a human can be catalyzing the making of different kinds of molecules. And there is no fundamental or essential difference between these two processes, other than maybe, yes, humans now have evolved new tools and making more complex or more variated molecules or anything else. But I simply don't see a difference fundamentally. But maybe we can talk about it another time. I just thought to bring this question as we remember what the discussion was about.
yeah, maybe it's not.
That's a great comment. Sasha always said, like, is the anthill unnatural?
Yeah,
Well, then
Right,
why would anything a human build be unnatural? There's no way to escape nature. We are nature. Modern society maybe has a slightly us versus them view of humans versus nature. Probably has at least some genesis with religion and this idea of being something separate. But to me, it often looks like humanity is more of like a seed or spore structure for the biosphere of Earth. It's like, here's the thing that's capable of reproducing. Here's the thing that's capable of starting an Earth somewhere else. It's an interesting question. I think it's probably hard to argue that we're not nature and that what we do is not natural. I don't know what you would use as a basis for a claim like that. So it's a good comment.
Well, if you assume nature is a closed set of possibilities or structures, then we can go beyond that. But I would rather say, and I'm sure Sasha would agree, that we are the way on which we are the agents by means of which nature unfolds itself, its own possibilities, yes, or maybe even that would be Nietzschean or Heideggerian. We are the means for nature to transcend itself, to overcome itself, to go towards that which has not yet been developed or unfolded. So via humans, through our capabilities, creative, intuitive capabilities of discovering the unknown, we are the agents of nature unfolding itself, right? So I agree with you that there is no opposition, there is no dichotomy. Yes, this is a dialectical process of nature constantly opening up itself towards something unknown and thereby finding its own possibilities that have not yet been examined or experienced.
Also, one further thing, sure how you pronounce your name, Maciek or Machek, or his comment in the chat here.
Yeah.
You know, there's how do I say your name, Maciek?
It's similar to magic. You can say magic. That's the easiest way to remember.
Well, I avoided that out of scientific bias, but anyway, you know, there's no way to really check whether any of these molecules we consider novel. They may have existed in the past. They may exist in some other part of the universe. We may just not have found it yet. There's many examples of this. DMT, thought to be synthetic, then found in nearly everything alive. Yeah. Diazepam, thought to be synthetic, pretty ubiquitous in nature. So, you know, novel to us.
Yeah.
Once again, there's a subjectivity, I think, that needs to be included in these kind of comments, or at least in the thought process.
Agreed.
Great job, guys. This is getting better every session.
Very interesting session. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Jitka. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Maciek. And thanks to others who are speaking. Jitka, can you give us the names of those participants, if they are not secret?
I think they can introduce themselves if they so.
But they are no longer here.
Oh no, they are here.
Oh, they are. I don't think so.
Hi, I'm Steve. I wanted to say something.
Yeah, please.
I read that the Chemical Abstract Service, which gives chemicals numbers, adds 15,000 chemicals every day. So we're discovering them. Thank you.
True. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm still very fascinated by the CAS number system, where every one compound, and not only compound, but also mixtures of compounds, oils, etc., every one of them has their specific number. This is very far from philosophy, but I think this is an incredible feat that we were able to ascribe 8 to 9 digit number to every compound in existence. And these digits even have meaning. Like you'll often see two similar compounds having two similar CAS numbers. That's very far from philosophy and very far from Shulgin, but just my 2 cents on why I love chemistry. Okay, thanks. See you guys.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
That's a great observation. Great observation.
it's like with the internet protocol, where you have the domain name system, where at the beginning we assumed that we ascribe 32 bits to each possible number that indexes all existing computers in the world, and we assumed there is going to be only as many, but it turned out it is not enough, and we had to extend the internet protocol and introduce a larger addressing scheme, because the numbers were not the space of numbering was not large enough, right, with the old internet protocol. But yeah, the assumption that you can index all entities in a certain space is a very strange and radical one. Yes, the idea that, like in a camp, you give a number to everything. You're indexed, everything is measured, described, objectively assigned to a number, and therefore objectively known. Well, this is not the only way to experience the world, luckily.
Humanity is increasingly amazing when you can get them away from making weapons and selling each other shit. Humanity is quite impressive.
Yes. So, Jitka?
I think this was a very fun session where it was very unstructured and interactive.
Thanks to your appeal, to your call to discuss and to make it a true seminar and not merely a lecture. And I appreciate your idea, and it was a very good session. Thanks.
I agree. There's a huge variety of knowledge about Sasha and his work that all of us that were radically affected by his existence. And these types of discussions, I feel, and they're extremely beneficial.
Yeah.
To pull together people who were affected in different ways, and to hear what seemed like the most powerful insights to each person, and kind of creates a more realistic view of Sasha.
Yeah.
Someone who's easily mythologized, especially after his death here.
Agreed. Thanks a lot. So see you in 2 weeks, and I hope we're going to continue in this way.
Thanks again, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you for the seminar. Have a good day, guys.
Good evening.
Bye.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, also, just to mention, a lot of people have trouble finding the link or getting in. There's been,
it is posted in all those places, but we have asked the Shulgin Foundation to spread the link. This link is going to remain valid for the entire seminar. So if you can spread it somehow, do it. We have posted it everywhere we could. We've asked the foundation to post it, but it has not yet been done. Hopefully it will be done for the next session. So this is all I can say.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Bye. Thanks, Jitka.
Thank you. It was good.
It was very nice. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Carl, also.
Yep. Bye. And how do I stop this thing?
By the way, Andrzej, maybe we can talk a little bit now
we can,
about all the other things that we wanted to.
But let's just stop, because this thing is, we can connect again in a while, but let's just stop. I think it's recording itself, and the transcription is being generated.
I see.
So
okay, but let's check in later.
So let's stop it and then connect.
I'll end it and then we connect somehow.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting, exactly. So I'm clicking leave, and I hope this thing is going to be preserved somehow, hopefully. Bye, and see you in a while.
Bye.
And I think you could do that as well, because I think you are the host currently.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Yeah. So.
Should I end it?
And have a look. You should click end and see if it's going to be somehow saved on your hard drive. Hopefully it will. Bye.
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Let me make you a guest because I'm on my phone. I don't want to.
I'm just
fuck it up.
clicking. Oh. All right.
Are you going to make it over for the Sasha Centennial also?
Yeah, I'm going to be there. Yeah,
Right.
I'm going to see you there. Cool. So see you.
Good.
Bye. And now we are ending.